Yeah, how's it going everyone? My name is Meister, and in today's video, we are going to be talking about the top 5 cards for every ink for Set 6 Disney Lorcana Azurite C. This set is packed with a lot of pirates and inventors, including cards from 2 new Disney classic titles such as Big Hero 6 and Rescue Rangers. There are a lot of new playable cards for this set, and some of them will allow other existing cards to finally see play. These are my personal predictions and what I think will see a lot of play in the meta, so take it with a grain of salt if you want. Before we start the video, don't forget to smash that like, subscribe, and bell button. Don't forget to comment down below your thoughts or just leave an emoji, because it helps. Now, what are we waiting for? Let's get on with it. Let's start with the number 5 spot for Amber. We have Dale, Friend in Need. Dale is basically like Moana from Set 5, except that he's inkable. Even though he goes in exerted, he is still super strong since 3/4 body that can quest for 2 is pretty hard to beat during early game. For number 4 spot, Jim Hawkins, Honorable Pirate. Jim Hawkins is basically the Stitch Surfer for pirates, except Jim has the potential of drawing more cards compared to Stitch. He also have a really big body that can survive many different attacks. Number 3, Sugar Rush Speedway Finish Line. This location is one of the best locations that came out for Set 6. This location allows location decks in general to have a pretty good finisher and a good draw engine. Now, I understand that it can be expensive to put something in here, but with the help of Sugar Rush Speedway starting line or cards that can cheat the cost of putting something inside a location will be a big help where the cost for finish line won't be a problem. Number 2, Lilo, Escape Artist. This is one of my favorite cards that came out for Set 6. Lilo is just super annoying to deal with. I understand that she's a 1/2 cost body that can quest for 2, but the fact that she can return at the start of your turn from your discard if you pay her cost, I think that's pretty ultra megatonic. It's basically an extra card all the time, and if you pair this with bodyguards or cards like Simba Pride Protector, then readying her up and making her safe won't be a problem. Another thing that I wanted to mention is that we can now discard this card without any problem. Because, like what I said, you can always pay 2 on the start of your turn and bring her back into play. And for the number 1 spot, we got Simba, Pride Protector. This card is one of my favorite cards that came out for Set 6. Simba Pride Protector is such a big threat on the board. Once this card goes into play, you can't allow it to survive for too long, because every turn, all of your opponent's character will just quest, and when Simba is exerted, he will ready everyone up so they can quest again or challenge the next turn. This is definitely one of the best cards in general for Set 6. Now, let's talk about the Amethyst cards. For number 5 spot, we have Maleficent Staff. Maleficent Staff is more of a 1-of or a 2-ofs unless you build a whole deck around it, which I don't think would be good. But as a splash for a deck, it basically counters every single bounce package Amethyst decks out there. All you have to do is pay the cost, put it into play, and watch it gain some lore almost every turn against Amethyst. Number 4, Hades, Lord of the Dead. This card is one of my favorite cards because it's exactly like Library, except instead of you getting draws from it, you gain lore instead. Build a wide board, and in turn 6, drop Hades, and basically, you're safe from Be Prepared or other board wipes in the game. Number 3, Yzma, Conniving Chemist. Yzma is another one of the biggest threats in this game. I definitely considered putting Yzma on the number 1 spot, but the fact that not every single deck will be running this is the only reason why it didn't get that spot. Yzma is a big threat on the board once it goes into play. And one of the reasons why is that your opponent can just burn their whole hand, exert Yzma, and get up to 3 cards so they can play some more. Yzma is also a great card to counter discard decks in general. Number 2, Diablo, Obedient Raven. Diablo is probably one of my favorite cards, and it's such a simple card. It's a 0 body that costs 1 and it's inkable. The thing about this card is that once it hits the board, it's gonna start gaining so much lore for you. Now, it also applies to Reckless that we can't see for your opponent's characters. Why? Because they have to attack this, otherwise it will keep gaining lore. And the beauty of this is that we don't mind losing Diablo. because Diablo will always pay for itself unless it gets Let It Go or Hades by Sapphire, or Under the Sea from Emerald. Number 1. Genie Wish Fulfilled. Genie is one of my new favorite cards for Amethyst on this set. Genie is just so big, 2/4 body, evasive, and gain a draw when you play it. He always pays for himself, but the fact that he can quest for 2 and he's evasive with a huge body, this will be a great tool against Steel or against Diablo in general. This will definitely be a contender for the spot of the rabbit. Next stop, Emerald. For the number 5 spot, we have You Came Back. You Came Back is such a simple card, but it screams a lot of fun and a lot of potential for me. Readying your character and being able to sing, challenge, or quest again is no joke. You can literally use this with cards that has ability or cards that can quest big in general. It has so much potential, and the only downside for it is that it's uninkable. For the number 4 spot, we have Daisy, Pirate Captain. Daisy Pirate Captain is one of my favorite arts and cards in general. I love pirates in this game, and Daisy gives the pirates a draw engine without relying on other draw engines that are not pirates. Daisy is definitely a staple if you're running Emerald Pirates. Number 3, Basil, Disguise Detective. This card is going to be one of the most annoying card in this game. The thing about Basil is that every turn we usually ink. And once this card enters play, you can just start removing cards from your opponent's hand 1 by 1 or 2 by 2 every turn. This is one of those cards that if you can't deal with it, it's basically checkmate. Number 2,
Bend to My Will.
Bend to My Will is definitely a contender for the top 1 spot. The only reason why I put this on 2 is because
I don't want you to guys play it.
it's gonna make the game so unfun. But jokes aside, this card is really good. The only thing about it is that it's uninkable, which it deserves in my opinion, because this is basically be prepared for your opponent's hand. Once you get to turn 7 and you don't have a board that can put so much pressure into your opponent, you definitely will have a hard time winning the game. This card will put you in top deck mode just like that once your opponent reaches 7 ink. Number 1, Go-Go Tamago, Darting Dynamo. This is definitely my favorite card for Emerald. As an Emerald Amethyst player, Go-Go Tamago is exactly what I want. It's a flexible card that I can play on turn 2 that can threat Diablo as well, but it can also be played on turn 4 where I pay 2 extra ink just so I can gain more lore. This is a great finisher for a lot of Emerald decks out there. Up next is Ruby. For the number 5 spot, we have Thievery. Thievery will have burn decks come to life. Ruby Amethyst is already attempting to create a burn deck. We've seen this on the DLC for Seattle, and Thievery is definitely a type of card that they want to run. It's cheap, it gains you 1 lore, and at the same time, it puts your opponent back 1 lore, which is a perfect recipe for racing your opponent. For the number 4 spot, we have Moana, Kakamora Leader. This card is definitely one of the most fun cards for set 6 in my opinion. Moana Kakamora Leader in a pirate deck with locations can be very deadly as a finisher. This card will allow you to gain so much lore towards the end and at the same time gain so many effects that you can gain from a location. This is definitely a great finisher for pirate location decks. Number 3, Moana, Self-Taught Sailor. This card is pretty simple. It's a big 1-cost card that is inkable and can start gaining 1 lore for you every turn. This is definitely a big threat that your opponent can't ignore. Now, if your opponent doesn't have Steel and can ping it for free, then they will most likely have to trade a character during early game just so they can get rid of this. Number 2, Aladdin, Intrepid Commander. This card is basically Cricky but faster, because you can play it on 4 and it's inkable. We all know how good Cricky is for tempo decks or mid-range decks in general. Aladdin basically allows you to do this a turn earlier. And the fact that it's a 1/4 body that can quest for 2, it's also a big threat after you control the board and you can start racing right away. And for the number 1 spot, we have Maui, Half Shark. I think this is going to be one of the cards that we'll see a lot of play for set 6. Maui Half Shark just allows you to gain card advantage and at the same time dig for an answer on your opponent's board from your discard pile. This card is also a big threat on the board because if you don't deal with this, it's just going to let your opponent gain so much lore and at the same time so much card advantage. Up next, Sapphire. For the number 5 spot, we have Plickly, Scientific Expert. Plickly is a 3-cost inkable with a big body, 3/4 that can quest for 1. But this is exactly what most blue decks need. Once you play a Tipo on turn 2 or any 1-cost or 2-cost characters, you can use Plickly to basically shift those cards and put them straight into ink. That's the way I look at it. This is definitely a body that a lot of Sapphire decks need because this allows them to ramp at the same time, not fall behind too much on board presence. Number 4, Oswald, the Lucky Rabbit. This is probably one of the most exciting cards for Sapphire. And the reason why is every time you ink, getting to play an item for free is just so much fun. This will allow you to play Lucky Dime at turn 3 or turn 4 or at any given point in time for free. Oswald is definitely a big threat once it enters play. I understand how easy to remove this card, but the fact that Sapphire players can hold this until late game and spend a lot of cards that can gain you extra ink, this will allow so much power plays for Sapphire to bring items into play. For number 3 spot, we have Tadashi, Gifted Roboticist. Even though Tadashi is uninkable and has a small body, this card is still a big threat because of the fact that it can quest for 2. Now, it's a card that you don't really want to banish from the game because your opponent will gain 2 free lore. But the fact that it can quest for 2, this card will basically put you in a position where do you want to deal with your opponent's ink or do you want to deal with how fast they're racing you? This card will definitely put you in a tough spot once your opponent puts this into play. Number 2, Prepare Your Bot. Prepare Your Bot is very simple to understand. It's a 1-cost action that is inkable that will allow Lucky Dime and allow Sapphire players to be able to finish in a blink of an eye. Number 1, Sail the Azurite Sea. This card is basically 1.5 card. It is 1 jump ahead mixed with Develop Your Brain. It's kind of a no-brainer to add this card into your deck if you are running Sapphire. It's really just that good. It's an upgrade for 1 jump ahead. And the fact that you can filter your deck with it and it's inkable just makes it one of the best cards for set 6 Azurite Sea. Last but not the least, Steel. For the number 5 spot, we have Mr. Smee, Captain of the Jolly Roger. This card is a great addition to the pirate decks, or steel decks in general. This allows you to have another good body for shifting. This allows you to have another shift character that can sing songs. But for the pirates, this will give you a pretty big body that also have the ability to either ping your opponent so you can finish them off with a challenge or just remove them because they're so tiny. Also, just imagine Mr. Smee singing a whole new world. For the number 4 spot, we have Twin Fire. This is basically Fire the Cannons on steroid. This card is so flexible. It has the ability to just be used as Fire the Cannons or Baboom and deal 2 damage to your opponent. But if your opponent's going too fast and you can't keep up with them, well, you can basically turn any cards in your hand into another Baboom or Fire the Cannons, which will allow Sapphire Steel especially, or just any steel decks in general, to be able to survive the early game. Number 3, Wreck-It Ralph Ham Hands. This is one of the most fun cards for me for set 6. This card just gives my location decks an Ultra Megatonic finisher, but the fact that it's so flexible and it can be used to remove your opponent's dimes or any of their items or any of their locations is just nasty. If this card survives, it's basically a guaranteed 5 lore in 1 turn, which makes it a big threat on the board. Number 2, John Silver, Stern Captain. John Silver is exactly the card that I've been asking for pirate decks. This card is basically the Cinderella of pirates. Imagine John Silver as Cinderella. I'm just kidding. But the fact that it's inkable and it's a 6/6 body that can quest for 2, this card is such a big threat on the board. And also, it has a bonus keyword which allows your opponent to think twice whether they should keep their characters ready or exert them to quest or challenge your characters, which puts them in a very awkward spot. Number 1, Kaloon, Marine Sergeant. This card takes the number 1 spot because I personally believe that this card will be a staple in most steel decks. The fact that it's a 3/2 body plus 1 resist, this will just allow Kaloon to survive many attacks from steel in general. And when it challenges and banishes your opponent's character, it's basically Robin Hood, Champion of Sherwood. You can gain 2 lore from it, and if they don't exert against Kaloon, well, Kaloon can just exert and gain 1 lore for you for free.